It's just about the end of January when I'm filming this, which means we've had a new US president for less than 2 weeks. And while Congress critters on Capitol Hill are still working through confirmation hearings for the new White House administration, President Donald Trump has wasted no time in signing a slew of executive orders designed to shape the country in his, or at least his patron's, image. From day one, the impact of those executive orders have been wide and far-reaching, and there's really not a single area of public life that hasn't been impacted. If you're watching this, the chances are, at least I hope, that you've been managing to walk the line between keeping track of some of the truly horrendous and cruel orders that have been passed down and looking after yourself and those you care about. And I'm sure you probably know that some of those orders have directly impacted the team here at the channel, raised questions about our future and legal status, and led to increased, openly condoned harassment and abuse. But today, I want to put that to one side and instead focus on some executive orders passed early in President Trump's second term, a freeze on all federal spending, and a freeze on disbursement of funds that were allocated by the previous administration for a whole slew of governmental programs, including programs designed to expand EV charging infrastructure in the US and support the growth of the EV and clean energy sector. We're going to examine what's going on and what we know, lay out some potential hurdles that might save all of those projects from annihilation, and ask what we can do to keep things on track. And given that this video was written on a Tuesday, filmed on a Wednesday, and published on a Thursday, things might be quite vastly different between now, this point in time, and then. For example, since we started the script on Tuesday, there's been an almost immediate challenge in federal court, a challenge which resulted in a judge halting various orders. And just before we started filming today, Wednesday, the White House effectively rescinded the original order and tried to play it down. Although, having talked to some of my sources in the government, much of the funding is still not available and working as it should. Because we're talking about the current White House and Donald Trump's propensity to ignore the courts, it's also anyone's guess as to what happens next and which executive orders are going to be issued in an attempt to distract and divert attention. But as my t-shirt hints, we are going to try and handle the bull. So let's get stuck in. If you're watching this and you find yourself frustrated that we are still covering political topics, I want to gently and politely remind you that politics, as we've noted plenty before, cover every aspect of our lives, from the food we buy to the taxes we pay and so much more. It is basically impossible to cover news in the EV world without mentioning politics, and in this case, ignoring politics would mean we'd miss out on covering something that will have a dramatic effect on the world in which we live, likely both in the United States, or as Mexicans will henceforth know it, America Mexicana, or in a wider part of the world. And yes, you don't get to rename an international body of water out of exceptionalism and with a fragile ego without causing the whole world to laugh at you, ignore you, and so much worse. And if you live outside of the US and you are tired about hearing about this metaphorical train wreck happening in the US, I understand it can be frustrating, and I'm sorry. That said, the things that are happening here in the US, like the withdrawal of the US from the Paris Climate Accord, the effective banning of new wind and solar farm leases on federal land, and the push to drill those same lands for oil and gas, risking untold damage on the planet, will sadly affect us all, no matter which country we live in. So too will the withdrawal of the US from the World Health Organization, the likely bans or massive reductions in vaccine availability, which when done in the past led to a massive increase in deaths and disability, the ban on all foreign aid spending, and the serious threats made against Europe over President Trump's insistence that he be given Greenland. And given his fawning over Putin, well, let's just hope that the US doesn't give Alaska back to Russia. Believe me, in a different world, I would love nothing more than to not spend my time covering this. But as the old saying goes, forewarned is forearmed, and when it comes to EV policy, that is super important right now. So Moving past the depressing and frankly scary nature of all of the orders that have already passed, let's lay out a quick 101 on how things normally work, how they're being circumvented, and what that means for us in the EV world. I'm going to start with a legal process surrounding this all, so if you want to skip it, you'll just be able to skip to this point in the video. And if you want a refresher or are curious because you're outside of the US, stick around for a bit. Ordinarily, it is the responsibility of the US Congress to pass new bills that either propose new laws or amend existing ones. In order for a bill to become a law, it needs to pass both houses, be agreed upon by both houses, and then signed by the president. I hope you already knew this, especially if you're a US citizen, because Schoolhouse Rock's explanation of how the US legal system works was, and frankly still is, required viewing. It's been ridiculed plenty over the years and parodied even more, but it still holds its own, 4+ decades after it was first made? It is, frankly, still one of the best ways to understand how American political systems operate. I'll try and link to it below. This process is also true for things like allocation of funds. The massive bills signed by President Joe Biden that allocated governmental funds to clean energy programs and EV incentives, most notably the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, had to be passed by both houses before they found their way to the presidential desk to be signed into law. Presidential executive orders traditionally have been used to manage operations of the federal government, primarily the executive branch. But thanks to various acts of Congress, there is some degree of discretionary power granted to the president to make wider changes, usually at times where a decision needs to be made quickly for matters of safety or security for the American population. They are not, or at least have not been, normally used to this degree to try and circumvent usual governmental lawmaking processes, although we are well outside the bounds of normal right now. As one lawyer friend of the channel put it, quote, "I'm not really sure if there are checks and balances anymore," end quote. But importantly, executive orders are not immune to judicial oversight or revocation. If a presidential executive order is in direct violation of the text of the US Constitution, it's inevitable that someone will challenge it in court. I know that we aren't a poli-science channel, but look, this is an important thing to know because in explaining what's happening with regard to the just signed executive orders, we need to understand what's likely moving forwards. And the answer is chaos. Chaos is what is likely, and it's already happening. People are confused, scared, and angry about what's going to happen next. In fact, between me starting to write this script and filming it, we've learned that the US federal government has ceased all funding disbursements for all programs, effectively shutting down the country, had that challenged, and now changed its mind. Without getting too far into the weeds, President Trump has halted all programs with executive orders that appear to be written by or influenced by Project 2025 architects. They are taking aim at anything that those people view as un-American, and that includes everything from food stamp programs to cancer research. The night after we finished the first draft of this, and believe me, this is about the 20th revision and we're all very short on sleep, the federal government sent a mass mailing drop to its employees referring to a quote-unquote fork in the road that faces the federal workforce. While the Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, is still awaiting confirmation of its Trump-nominated head, it appears that Tesla's CEO has been given control of the entity in the interim and has placed executives from his various companies in control of the agency. The email that went out was, as one of my sources in the government noted, quote-unquote, right out of Musk's playbook, and gives employees of the federal government two choices: resign now and be given employment through September, along with the ability to continue to work from home, or two, return to office work immediately and face an uncertain future in which, and this bit isn't specifically laid out but very heavily implied, they will likely be fired anyway. Another contact within the government that I spoke to said it was written like a spam email and seems designed to get people to unsubscribe from their jobs so that the government doesn't have to fire them. It is authoritarianism 101, and if you're interested, I'll link to a video in the down below explaining a little more in detail about how this was seemingly the plan all along for this administration. And while, to reiterate, the executive orders that originally stopped all funding of things has now been apparently rescinded, word on the ground is that it's not actually doing that yet. And just Earlier this week, President Trump signed an executive order attempting to ban anything that looks like gender-affirming care for minors in the US. It's filled with lies. Just call them that because that's what they are, about existing healthcare programs that are used to justify the order, and it comes on the back of a whole slew of other hateful bills targeting trans individuals' rights to serve their country in the military, get a passport, and so much more. I know that if I go on, I will be accused of bringing my personal agenda into this, but as I've noted in previous videos, not sharing what's going on and pretending that everything is normal here will undoubtedly lead people to think that things are okay when they're not, and that will ultimately impact us. It's almost certainly a precursor to trying to stop the kind of healthcare that many of the team at TE and their friends and family rely on, and could even expand to denying other forms of healthcare, like the medication I rely on to keep my genetic heart condition in check because of quote-unquote ethical concerns about the patient's lifestyle. But to avoid being told I'm throwing agendas down people's throats, I'm going to stop now and leave that topic and focus on the EV and clean energy sector, because there's also a lot happening there right now. So far, a bunch of executive orders have been signed that effectively ban the leasing of federal lands for renewable energy programs, that's solar and wind, and President Trump has complained bitterly about wind turbines and how they kill birds and the noise that causes cancer, and used parts of that as justification for his decisions. Ironically though, both high-rise buildings and the domestic cat kill more wild birds than wind turbines, and we won't get into the number of deaths from gasoline carcinogens, but that's all just dandy. An executive order signed just last week also attempted to rescind the federal tax credits for EVs, and this week, the executive order I mentioned already, banning all payouts from the federal government to programs that were funded by the previous administration. While some of that has been backtracked, it's still devastating. Federally funded programs in the EV world include the NEVI, the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, that's been funding deployment of public EV charging infrastructure, and it, along with the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure, or CFI program, have long been treated by conservative groups like those responsible for Project 2025, the foundational document for this government's policies, as tantamount to communism, which in reality they aren't even socialist. Frankly, they're capitalist policies for a capitalist approach to infrastructure investment. Since I'm now going down the path of I'm really fudging mad and so are the team, I'm going to take this little moment to help point you in the direction of Philosophy Tube, which lays out very well the difference between communism, socialism, and other societal governmental styles. Abigail is great, and I am one of her patrons, and yes, you should be too. President Trump's latest executive orders attempt to freeze the billions of dollars set aside for EV and clean fuel infrastructure, not to mention funds available for modernising and upgrading the US's ageing electrical grid, crumbling bridges and potholed roads. And I've been spending a lot of time talking to the many people who are involved with projects earmarked to receive funds, and frankly, things on the ground are not looking great, even after this apparent rescindment of the original announcement. While this latest slew of executive orders has already landed up in court, and some are on hold, I've heard directly from folks who say they've been told by the administration to pause any work that's covered by a governmental grant and/or loan. I don't know at this time if the cuts do or do not even include the low-interest loans granted to automakers under the Low-Interest Advanced Vehicle Technology Manufacturing Loan Program that has existed since the turn of the century, and I might add a program that was established by a Republican president. So as I've said, programs that were already established were told earlier this week to immediately cease any activities, including activities that were required under funding rules to secure future funding or release further agreed upon funds. And right now, there's no official guidance or clarity from the federal government about how those organisations should proceed, even though the federal government has now said it's backtracked and rescinded that original executive order. I should note that in the case of already agreed upon funding that's already been promised to organisations and companies with signed contracts, withholding that funding is illegal under US federal law. So, even though things are moving around very quickly, we can also expect a slew of new court cases attesting to that fact. But Nobody really seems to know how things will play out, especially as recent Supreme Court cases appeared to hand the White House broad immunity from consequences. So, the unwritten, unspoken implication here is that it is tough luck and that organisations waiting on the funds should either completely close up shop or somehow just find alternative sources of funds. From startups working on alternative energy to companies developing low-carbon agricultural practices, EV startups, charging station companies, and even entire states. Everyone seems caught up. Yesterday, they said no bills will be paid, no funds will be reimbursed. And today they've changed their mind, although, as I've noted, that doesn't appear to be the case. And sadly, that could force many of these startups out of business. If you were building a house and you applied for a loan to finish it off and the bank said, yep, you're all good to go ahead, you can order all the things you need to finish your building, but then turned around and said, actually, we've changed our mind, we're not giving you any money, you'd be left holding the metaphorical baby and nothing else. And that's what the EV industry is facing. It may be illegal. It definitely is. But there are many, many contracts that the federal government is apparently effectively trying to nullify because drill, baby, drill. Also, trans people bad. If you're thinking this dramatically undermines people's faith in the federal government, you would be right. And that objectively is part of the point of Project 2025, because making people distrust government is a huge win for them. It also intentionally sabotages the government. It really helps when you want to lay off tens of thousands of government workers without too much pushback from the public. And if you are among those that look at this and say, but it's not Project 2025. President Trump said he didn't know who they were. I'd like to remind you that the bingo card of Project 2025's goals and what's actually happened thus far is kind of similar. There's a British phrase that I'd like to throw in here that says, this person couldn't arrange a piss-up in a brewery. And that seems to be the kind of apt thing at this juncture. While the ruthlessness of these orders so far is unquestionable, no single person I've heard from, obviously I'm keeping names out of this to avoid potential backlash for the individuals involved and us, are confident that even with the courts stepping in to try and stop the government, things will be okay, because they clearly won't, and we have a whole slew of historical data to back that assumption up. Additionally, this complete chaos, in addition to decimating existing EV infrastructure and leading to likely more broken and unserviced charging stations, will have a knock-on effect on the whole EV industry. Jobs will be lost, people will be left in the cold, and we can look forward to a future where some charging stations will be just completely abandoned. This isn't a slow and gradual change, this is an overnight knee-jerk that, even if stopped by the courts and rescinded, will likely lead to a lot of money being left unaccounted for, and lots of people trying to pick up the pieces, as well as folks trying to take advantage of the situation. As for the legal ramifications of this, well, we know, as several other outlets have pointed out, that the actions of the federal government, specifically the executive branch, are in breach of so many parts of the Constitution and more laws than we can probably list in a short-ish video. And the court cases already making their way through the judicial system will likely have some serious merit to them. But the problem here is that because of the sheer breadth of legal cases filed in just the last 2 weeks, it's very unlikely that we'll see much in the way of expeditious progress in resolving the situation. And because this is the current White House we're talking about, there's also an expectation that whatever orders are issued by the courts, the White House might just ignore. It's done it in the past, and honestly, I would be very surprised if that doesn't happen again. There's plenty of evidence to suggest that's going to be the first choice option instead of phoning a lawyer friend. So, what now? Well, we can expect that EV charging infrastructure across the US might start to look a little ropey in remote areas. Most likely this will first be felt in red states, who are less likely to try and plug funding gaps for something they don't believe in. In blue states like Oregon, there's already been pledges made by the state government to try and keep things running until this is all over. And if funds aren't being issued, charging providers are going to focus on keeping sites that make them money over ones that don't. And that also means some startups, both EV companies and charging, will inevitably fail, and the number of community programs for clean energy and green transportation may also start to dwindle. Sure, there's the private sector, but if the federal government starts to put barriers in place, President Trump has already threatened solar power deployment using falsehoods about solar panel production and toxicity, that could further scupper future programs. Of course, long term, for consumers, that will also mean the US will lag behind in the availability of cheap and abundant renewable energy, not to mention clean, cheap EVs. It'll push us further behind China and Europe, especially given at least one US source of oil is already a net energy negative. These decisions will damage the US economy for decades to come and the planet. Unless Congress steps in and says no, which is laughable right now because Congress, like the White House right now, is under Republican control. And while that remains the case, we can expect any policies pertaining to environmental protection or clean energy and transportation to be given a short amount of attention on Capitol Hill. See the previous video we made about automakers and the oil industry funding campaigns. Although, it is important to note that in both houses, the margin of Republican control is pretty slim. State governments are going to resist the push, and we should see states like California, Oregon, Washington, New York, and others step up to the plate to pick up where the feds are leaving off. But doing all of that will take time. Relief will be a little time coming, and while it might pave the way long term, it won't save many of the companies, programs, and individuals who rely on funding immediately. And sadly, the only way we can affect this, and I know you're going to be fed up of me telling you this, is to make your Congress critters so familiar with your voice that they will either run in fear when they hear you or invite you over on Sunday afternoon for a cold one. So particularly if you are a resident of an area with a Republican representative, but also if you've got a Democratic representative, calling them and letting them know that you are not a happy bunny could have an outsized impact. These folks are notoriously lonely, and they really do want to hear from you, often. People who work in activism say that it's startling how few calls reps actually get, except during moments of concerted efforts by specific groups. So your one call might be the only call that rep gets in that day, and it might be the only source of public opinion they hear. Government is supposed to be by the people, for the people, and by becoming active in your community, asking questions, and holding metaphorical feet to the fire, you can dramatically impact change. I want to be really clear here. I am talking metaphorically holding people's feet to the fire. We don't condone torture. To recap, if you want a cleaner, greener, safer, smarter, and more equitable world for yourself, your family, and the generations to come, you need to be more active. If you are a US citizen, you need to talk to your Congress critters. And if you are outside of the US, call your local elected officials and implore them to put pressure on the US government, because the US is big enough that if it decides not to do something, companies around the world will change their policies. We are already seeing it. Just last week, Stellantis and Nissan changed plans for future EVs in the US, and this week, Volkswagen says it wasn't bringing a new model to the US because of the presidential inauguration. And no matter how you might like to scream and say that insert name of company and insert name of CEO, you know who I'm talking about, will save us, I want to be explicit. They don't. They don't want to. They never did. If we want a better world, we need to work to build it ourselves. So get active in your community, adopt a charging station, install your own with help from local charities or sponsored by a local business, arrange meetups, arrange advocacy groups, and arrange letter writing sessions. They, you know who I'm talking about, want us to be despondent. They want us to give up. But a cleaner, greener, more equitable future is too valuable to leave in the hands of folks who only want their pockets to get deeper and to watch and laugh as more folks suffer. And if you've got this far through the video, thank you. It wasn't easy to make, it's not going to be easy to produce, and I'm assuming it's not going to be easy to watch. I know some of the information in it will be old and out of date by the time you watch it, And I know that we will lose a bunch of subscribers because of this who only wanted to talk about the newest, shiniest car. There's a YouTube channel out there that does just that, and they got a lot of heat this week for publishing a review of a certain new car from a certain new company. But look, to be a beacon of hope, to avoid the horror, we need to craft a future. And that means we're going to have to deal with some of the nasty stuff. We might not have any more shiny new EVs to fawn over if we don't. And as a finisher, for updates to this story, we'll try and keep everyone up to date in our Discord and when possible in pinned posts here. So make sure that you are subscribed to us on YouTube or PeerTube and join the Discord chat room. Most of the time it's a nice place to be. Thanks for joining us today. And if you've got thoughts, make sure you leave them in our Discord chat room, on our Patreon page, down below, or you can reach out to us on Mastodon or Blue Sky. Thanks to the amazing list of people scrolling by on your screen right now. They're part of the massive community of supporters who make this channel possible, helping us through Patreon and YouTube, covering our bills, paying our team, and helping us to remain 100% independent. If you'd like to join them and see your name listed here, just follow the links below. We've got options available across a range of different price points from just $1.50 US a month. A massive welcome to our newest supporters: Taylor Knox, Skyel, Andy, Gilardo Orzoko, Herb Suvesh, Dave Dittman, Christopher, Sean, Douglas Hill, Patrick Adams, How Many Wills Will Will Smith Smith If Will Smith Will Smith Wills, Eridoom, Beazle Bob, William Hoffman, Cicadas Sing to hide existential dread at their short lives, Alan Benton, CC, Robert Howell, Mr. Hockey, and John DePoy. To join the list and get your shout out, become a paid Patreon member for your moment of fame, and you can even give membership to someone else. If you'd like to support us with a one-off donation, you'll find links below to make Ko-fi and Bitcoin donations, and we even have an old-fashioned PO box you can reach us at for the time being, addressed below. You'll also find links to our swag store, and if you're someone who has to shop on Amazon, please consider using our affiliate link so we get the commission, not Jeff Bezos. So we can continue to focus on making our content even better and reduce burnout, we're being a little freer with our release days, but plan on dropping new content every Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday on our main channel, plus something over on Sunday on TE Take 2. If you want more, the algorithm that hates us thinks you should watch this video, but this video is one we'd like you to check out. Be awesome, be kind, be intentional, and don't forget to resist. Keep evolving!